Hi, it's Olivia, and recently I read We Are the Water Protectors, and I wanted to have a discussion about not only adults reading picture books, but the larger discussion of adults reading children's lit and picture books in middle grade and young adults.
I think we should have that conversation.
And not just for a kid in your life or even nostalgic reasons, picking it up and going, oh, I remember reading this back in the day. I'm talking about reading these books for yourself, or if you're not an adult, reading outside your age bracket. I hope to convince you to consider and respect children's literature a little bit more if you don't already, and specifically hope to get you to pick up a picture book. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm gonna try. In this essay, I will. Let's start with why don't adults read kids' books already? Obviously, when I'm talking to you, an adult, about reading outside of your target demographic, that means reading younger. And to a lot of people, that can come off immature or juvenile or just it's childish. There are those who just don't see it as that complex or deep or engaging. And I also think there's some assumptions of intelligence. Like if there's an adult reading kids' books, the question would be, why aren't you reading at an adult level? Like, shouldn't you be reading adult things? So to anyone hesitant of reading kids' books because of like this aversion to seeming childish, or you just want to show that you read at an adult level, I would like to include this quote by C.S. Lewis to segue into the rest of the video. He said, "Critics who treat adult as a term of approval instead of as a merely descriptive term cannot be adult themselves. To be concerned about being grown up, to admire the grown up because it is grown up, to blush at the suspicion of being childish, these things are the marks of childhood and adolescence." Towards the end he says, "When I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I am 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up." I love that quote. Let's talk about target demographic, like early reader, middle grade, young adult, adult. These are labels that have been placed by publishers, and they also serve as marketing tools. The labeling has evolved a lot over time, especially young adult, which I think is a little bit more unclear. There was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, which had a major impact on how publishers handled like the teenage target demographic, and then obviously like massive books like Harry Potter, Twilight, The Hunger Games, and more recently The Hate U Give. I definitely still see young adult as an age category rather than a genre, but it's always talked about like a genre. But like, yeah, these are all young adult, but they are all so different. They have their own genres and their own styles. I would like to ask that question to you. How do you define young adult? Especially if you're a librarian or a bookseller. You probably know way more on this than me. The way I see it, each of these groups has distinct characteristics, which is why they get that age label. It kind of follows like the natural stages of development over our life. It actually reminds me of like psychology classes. What is it? Is it Piaget or Erickson? I don't know. I'll include a chart of what I'm thinking about. I feel like that our natural development is reflected in the kind of themes and stuff that characters go through and experience in these stories. Anyway, sometimes the whole target demographic is critiqued, and I don't get that. Like saying YA is filled with X, Y, and Z tropes. Couldn't you make that claim for any genre? Every genre, whether it's adult romance or adult fantasy, has its tropes, and I feel like sometimes those tropes are kind of what make it in that category, in that genre. But it's the YA demographic that gets that it's all the same label. I never see adult books critiqued this way, and there are plenty of books out there that are typical and do the same stuff, but that's just the business. Even beyond books, you know, they see something is popular, they're gonna milk everything out of that trend until like we can't stand the trend. But to claim that every single one of these stories and the writing is the same, I think is grossly generalizing, because Victoria Schwab does not write the same or have the same stories as Sarah J. Maas, and Sarah J. Maas does not write the same as Tomi Adeyemi, and she doesn't write the same as Neil Shusterman, and so on. On top of everything, books are subjective, so whether you're critiquing it or praising it, it's all valid. I just really disagree when a critique or something is framed as like what the entire demographic is like an objective thing, you know? I don't like that. There are terrible and excellent and mediocre books across the board, no matter the genre, no matter who it's marketed towards. And I guess I just don't think that target audience equals the only audience that can enjoy a story. I think it does a disservice to limit your range of reading. You know, the world is bigger than the demographic that you align with, and as children we were limited by our reading capabilities, but now we have the privilege of being able to read pretty much everything out there. And imagine we had the most expansive bookstore. Why would you limit yourself to one section? No one's stopping you. The only gatekeeper is yourself. And then let's talk preferences. What if somebody just prefers adult content? That is perfectly valid. I just think that sometimes people put down children's lit because it lacks that adult content or for its writing. Whether you like simple or really elaborate writing, I don't think it's a reflection of your intelligence, but rather your preference. Someone could look at a 1,000-page plus book and think, this is great, this is what I like, because they can take all the time they want to do the world building. But then you can have someone else who thinks that it's too bloated and that they should really work on editing that book to get to a shorter page count because they just don't like that. And let's talk about books that have really dark or violent and graphic content. A lot of adult books can kind of go into that rated R territory, and that's a reason some critique children's lit, because they feel like it's stifled with how far they can go because of who it's marketed towards. Well, first, I just wanted to say that the fluffy and lighthearted and magical stories they still have merit. And then second, I don't think that whether a book is dark or has those kind of more graphic elements, or if it has a happy or an unhappy ending, I don't think that's a mark of its quality. It's just something that exists in the story. In fact, there have been a number of adult books that I've seen that reviewers have criticized for having unnecessarily graphic scenes, things that didn't add to the story, things that seem to have just been graphic for the sake of being graphic or for it being an adult book. And, you know, even as adults, we could probably see all the R-rated movies that we want, but not every adult is watching the Saw franchise because they just don't want to. Some people just don't like this kind of content. My point is, don't rule out children's lit because of their lack of graphic content. And on that note, it's not as if it doesn't exist for children. Just like in real life, people of all ages experience trauma and horrific events. Young children are familiar and have experienced violent racism and homophobia, and unfortunately children and teenagers know and have experienced rape and death, and this is reflected in stories out there. Just because you don't see them doesn't mean that they don't exist. Anyway, I've been talking about all the reasons people judge or hesitate to pick up kids lit, but now I can talk about why it's so great. If 2020 has proven anything, it's that the world can be exhausting and sad and stressful and, endless list of adjectives, but there is such a delight and joy that comes with kids lit and an appreciation of the world, and it's just much needed. It's so needed. And books, have you read Winnie the Pooh? It is such a delightful story, and just books that are aimed especially at the 2 to 8 age bracket are so filled with wonder and joy, and the world is still, new and limitless, and I think there is so much beauty in that. Also, some of the more basic principles that are at the forefront of kids' books, like empathy and friendship, are things that I think adults can really revisit, especially empathy. I honestly look at a lot of the world's problems today and I wonder to myself, if that person or if that group had a little bit more empathy, would this problem even exist? I genuinely wonder that a lot. Another great thing is kids lit oftentimes doesn't interrupt your regular reading plans. You can read both kids and adult lit. You don't have to switch them out. You can have the best of both the worlds. And the advantage is they're often really quick reads, especially picture books. A picture book, there are some you can read in a matter of minutes. So for those who say that they're a waste of time, I ask, if it only takes 5 minutes, is it really a waste of time? And then of course the really great kids books out there can seem to have different meanings depending on your age. Maybe as a child you saw the more obvious fun story, but then as a grown-up you realize the deeper meanings and the philosophy behind it. And on that note, I think that's commendable that children's book authors can do that they can sometimes take these very big ideas and make it palatable for kids and something that adults can enjoy. That is not easy. I think people underestimate children's book writers. Also, there are a number of adult authors out there, authors you may have read and enjoyed, who also are children's book authors. The most recent one that comes to my mind, just because his book has recently come out, is Barack Obama's A Promised Land. I think that is his memoir, but he also has past books, and he has a children's book called Of Thee I Sing, and I read it, and I think it's a really sweet book about the potential of his kids, and I thought it was really sweet. You know, there's celebrities have all sorts of books, but there's a number of them who also have children's books, and I thought Lupita's book with Vashti Harrison was amazing, Sulway. And then, if you didn't know, Jim Carrey has a picture book called, I think it's called How Roland Rolls. I read that earlier this year. But yeah, it's pretty neat. Also, there is beauty in simplicity. Just because we've reached the point where we could read and enjoy these layered and complex stories with all this nuance that we can appreciate as adults, it doesn't negate the fact that we can still read and enjoy the stories that are told simplistically. We have the best of both worlds. I also wanted to talk about diversity because across the board, we know that there's massive disparities in terms of representation in books. And so any progress I talk about, there's still a massive disparity. But when it comes to children's literature, I think that I have seen more progress with this area. And I feel like it's something I literally see more on book covers with the stories that are being told. There's a lot of data for this. Over the past few years, there's been a lot of data showing the improvements. I mean, again, there's still a huge disparity, but there are improvements, and you can see the graphs that come out. But I was researching for this video, and whether I was researching bad or it just doesn't exist, I couldn't find like the equivalent of these charts for adult literature. And then this New York Times article came out. It was a study of all the books published since 1950, and it showed that only 5% of them were by authors of color. And I think in 2018 alone, it was around 10%. And I wish I could use this as evidence, but I don't know, because they didn't specify if they only used adult books. If they did, that would be a clear point. Again, these are just assumptions, but I feel like children's literature has been making progress with its representation, maybe more than adult literature. It's just an assumption. And now it's time for the picture book love. So first things first, the creativity is astounding. Obviously, they come in different formats. Some of them are long and tall and big and small. And not just that, but they use the end pages and the front and back and the typography and everything about it. Like, they can get so creative with these kids' books. One of my favorites, The Stinky Cheese Man and Other Fairly Stupid Tales. On the back, you know, it's got this fun, it's kind of breaking the fourth wall. It's playing, this chicken is talking about the ISBN code, but also there's this page that, like, I always recall rereading as a child, like the play with the text getting tinier and tinier. It's just hilarious, and I love that kind of stuff. And obviously illustrations are a hallmark of picture books. Instead of descriptions and world building, you get a lot of pictures. And you may be thinking of some very basic kid art styles, but there's also a lot of really, really incredible artwork in children's picture books. And if you're interested in art and stories, again, this is kind of the best of both worlds. There's this book you might have heard about, probably not. It's called Where the Wild Things... I can't even keep a straight face, because Where the Wild Things Are is one of the most popular picture books in history. But something that I love about it that I didn't even realize until later on, maybe you recognize this, but I didn't for a while, how the illustrations as Max starts his journey start out literally small, and then they just get bigger and bigger till they're on the left side of the page, and then eventually they're full spread. And then as he comes back from his journey, they start to, I went past, but they start to shrink again. That kind of thing is so cool and gives additional meaning to the story. Also, not only are they fun, but they are funny. I also happen to enjoy kids' humor, but you know, anything goes. You put some eyes on anything and it is a character. Some of the funnier books that I've read in the past few years, I love John Klassen's books, particularly I Want My Hat Back. I think that's hilarious. Lastly for this, I think that it's an easy way to learn new things. And I know I've been talking mainly about like fictional books, but nonfiction children's books are a great way to learn things. Obviously, I keep recommending her books. Vashti Harrison's Little Leader series, but I also recently read Fry Bread, and I learned all about making fry bread, and I thought that was really cool. And lastly, the stigma attached to adults who read children's literature very much gives me adults who criticize other adults for still watching cartoons and animated works. You know, those people who feel like you're too old for that, or when they come across one that's actually good, they're like, oh wow, didn't expect that to be good. Like, there's this assumption that animated works are not as good sometimes, but I don't need to give you the very long list of animated movies and shows that are well written and wonderful. People judge the audience and the medium itself. It's just a medium of storytelling, and in fact I think there are certain stories for which animation is kind of the only way to tell it. Like, I'm really opposed to a lot of these live action remakes of animated movies for that reason, because some of them I feel like were made to be animated. I remember in 2016 my two favorite movies that I saw that year were The Revenant and Zootopia. And The Revenant came out like the very end of 2015, but I saw it in 2016. Such wildly different movies, but they were both excellent. Zootopia was so well written and has all of these underlying messages and themes, and it has such great characters, and it's funny and has plot twists. I knew I was watching a great movie, but I knew I was watching an excellent movie when they threw in a direct and obvious Breaking Bad reference, and it just flowed so well into the plot. I was so impressed, and there would still be people out there who wouldn't even give that movie a chance because it's, you know, a kid's movie, it's an animated movie. Just like how I marvel at the illustrations of picture books, I am astounded by how incredible animation is, especially today. The animation is just out of this world, and it's a shame that the labels and the judgment stops people from getting to see these incredible stories. And just like with kids' books, kids' movies are made by adults, and so oftentimes they're made so that way they can enjoy them too. To wrap this up, I think that children's literature doesn't get the attention and chance that it deserves because it's ruled out by people's labels and generalizations. And I don't think that anyone should be made to feel that what they choose to read is inadequate. I'm thinking also definitely about like the romance genre. So go forth and unapologetically read children's literature, or go and rewatch that animated show. I personally am in the middle of my second or third rewatch of Avatar: The Last Airbender since it was put on Netflix, so I'd love to know your thoughts on anything. Did I convince you to pick up a picture book or no? Maybe I did terrible and you're more excited to pick up that adult book. I don't know. Like I said, I'd like to have that conversation.
I think we should have that conversation.
Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye.